Welcome to the Simply Authentic podcast with Angie and Tanya, where we hope to inspire you to dream big and push past your fear, empower you to take charge of your own life, and challenge you to be the most authentic self you can be.
Welcome back to the Simply Authentic podcast. I'm Tanya Murfin.
And I'm Angie Mullings. And today we are here with part 2 of Overcoming Obstacles. And Tanya's going to share with us her story today.
Yeah, so my story is a little different than yours, Angie. It comes from a third grader's eyes. So when I started to think about if I had any story about a recession or that type of thing, I went back to when I was a third grader, and I did a little research to begin with on what a definition of a recession is. And if you don't know, it's defined as an overreach by the federal government to stabilize inflation. So you'll hear in my story how bad it got in the government trying to correct inflation. So in 1981, I was in the third grade. And I've already told you and the listeners about my background of growing up in a family of builders and developers. So this story speaks to that family history. And I remember at that time being a third grader, I remember my parents and grandparents talked a lot about our family business. We were always with them, and it was always a topic of conversation. We were always at building sites. We were always driving through neighborhoods. So I was no stranger, even as a child, to hear discussions ongoing about the family business. So we, at this time in 1980 and 81, we had developed Raintree Estates in the middle of Nixa, Missouri. And we weren't only building houses in this subdivision, we had bought the land, we were putting in streets, we were dealing with a much bigger project than just being builders of homes.
You were developing at that point.
Yeah. So the reality of what happened to me as a third grader is I knew my dad had suddenly moved off to Texas. And he had moved there for work and left my brother and my mom and I behind so that he could send money and so that we could continue to pay our bills. So he had been down there a while, according to his story, which I'll tell in a minute, but a while might have been a year to a year and a half before.
It's relative, especially to a third grader.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So he and my mom decided that we would move down there finally. So I don't think that they saw an end to the recession at the time, and we were all living apart. And so my mom packed us up. And I remember having to leave Nix's third grade class and join a new school and try to make new friends in Longview, Texas is where we moved to.
Okay.
I ended up finishing third grade in Texas, and we only lived there for about 6 months. So we arrived in early in the year of 1981, maybe January, February, finished the school year, and we were back for the next school year, moved back in August before my fourth grade year. Okay. So we weren't there all that long, but in my mind, it was one of the best memories, except for having to join a new school, of course, and having to make new friends, because we lived in an apartment complex next to my aunt and uncle and my cousins Dabney and Brianne. We spent every day with them on our back patio, joined by a fence between the two. And I remember we had coolers set on each side so us kids could climb over every day.
Oh, fun.
And I guess the adults did too, but all I remember is us kids doing that. So the complex had a great pool in it, and we spent every day at the pool in the summer, had a great summer there. It was like being on vacation, right?
So to a third grader, you didn't recognize or realize that it was because your family was going through a rough patch.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all. I just really, to me, it was we had to pick up and move. My dad moved to Texas. We had to pick up and move. And suddenly we're living in an apartment in Texas, right? Okay. So fast forward to my dad's perspective. So I called him to get his memory of what happened with him. and my family. He and my uncle and grandpa were knee deep at the time in trying to finish a subdivision, build houses, sell lots, and feed their families. And in that day, my dad and uncle put in their own utilities to save money. So they even went and bought a backhoe, borrowed money to buy a backhoe so that they could put in their own utilities to save money. So they were in the midst of putting those utilities in at the back of the subdivision when the market completely fell apart.
Okay.
Everything stopped. Interest rates continued to rise in an attempt to reduce inflation. Unemployment rate at the time was 20%, and I looked up Springfield's current unemployment rate today, and it's at 2.8%. So that gives you a little bit of perspective. 20% of the people were unemployed.
Yeah. Crazy.
Interest rates went as high as 18.45% in October of 1981 for an annual average of 16.63 for that year. And then that decade was finished at around 10% rate. That was average. So
and compared to today when people think they're really high, which is around 7, a little less than 7%, they were nowhere near what they've been or what they were in the 80s.
No. So as you can imagine, buildings stopped, buying lots stopped, streets going in stopped, everything stopped. My family had borrowed the money for the subdivision from Nixa Bank, which was owned at the time by the Yates family. And if you're an old Nixa person, you know the Yates name. Everybody banked there, everybody knew them, and they were friends of my family. Right. So that's where we borrowed our money from. And they started calling because we started having difficulties paying the bills. There was no cash flow coming in. My cousin's grandfather, Merle Louderback, called the local builders and carpenters around Nixa and said he was going to Texas to work on building nursing homes. So I hear that now, and I didn't even know that little fact. I figured they were building apartment complexes or something down there for living, and it was nursing homes. So I guess that was a saving grace that they were building something that people are always going to get older.
Right.
And the economy down there for that, apparently there was a need for it. So he needed a crew of foremen to go. So my dad and uncle and numerous other locals moved to Texas. They had been there for a while when my dad thought maybe a year or two when he decided to move my mom and my brother and I down. Most of the men, he said, who had been down there with him were there for 2 to 3 years, some longer than that, to have money to send back up here to pay bills. So meanwhile, while we all went to Texas, my grandpa stayed here to run the business. And I wish he were here today for me to ask my questions to what that was like for him. I would love to hear that perspective. Right. He was the only one answering the hard questions from the bankers and from the contractors that we couldn't pay our bills. My dad said that Nixa Bank ended up tacking on all of the interest on the end of our payments, and that was the only way that we kept what we owned. Otherwise, we would have lost it all. And my dad even ventured to say that possibly that wasn't best practice. Yeah. But they didn't want to take that back, I'm certain, any more than they, wanted us to keep it. So it was probably which is the better scenario here. So So that made our balloons really big at the end. In the end, once my dad and uncle got back from Texas, business went back to a new normal. There was no money to be made for our families any longer in building and developing. We just had to get out of that and finish it. So he said, really, after those inflated and ballooned interest payments, and we paid all of our debt off, we were lucky to make $1,000 on each house that we would build. So my dad said he had to pivot. That's a word we like to use, that he knew he had to start something new when he got back here. And I had an uncle and aunt at the time that had a successful mail order business. And so my dad went into his own version of that. And he and my mom set up this business with my dad doing woodworking because he was a talented woodworker and would build furniture and make signs. And he rolled a lot of grapevine wreaths in that time. Those are really popular. And they set up this full-fledged mail order business. And for you young people who don't know what that might be, I remember us making brochures, and my mom and dad would set the stage with this cute little wooden piece, whatever they were selling, and take a picture of it. And then they took all these pictures someplace to get a brochure made. And I remember people calling our home phone, because that was the only phone we had, right? And giving their address for my mom to mail them a brochure. They would call us and place an order, and the U.S. Postal Service would then deliver their order probably weeks and weeks later. Who knows how long that took. But that's what a mail order business was, kids. And so my brother and I saw our parents, have to move to Texas, and then we witnessed them setting up a completely new business in our basement. So again, as a third and a fourth grader by now, you have zero perspective.
Right.
But for now,
you have a great appreciation for that.
I have a great appreciation.
Yeah, because they just really recreated themselves.
They did. Yeah, they had to. And in years following that, both my mom and dad got into healthcare and worked full-time in healthcare for another 28 or 30 years to have a different sort of stability in their lives.
So all of this happened because of the economy, obviously, and there was your parents moved and decided to move your family because they were struggling and had to find work elsewhere. But what do you remember about that time as a child, as a third grader? What did you learn, or what were your thoughts at the time?
Well, my family was always frugal. I come from penny pinchers, and I remember those times being extra lean, and I can describe it that way now. At the time, I'm sure that as a child, it just meant we didn't get to go out to eat anymore.
Right.
And growing up, I know that there were many years that we would go out to eat to a nice restaurant once a month. And it was usually Leong's Tea House, for those of you who know what that is. But that kind of went away, and we shared a lot of meals with family. And I know for certain that had my parents not already known how to be frugal and how to save money and had put money aside for emergencies, we probably wouldn't have survived. And it also taught me that to take care of your family, you'll do most anything, right? You'll move away to another state. You'll stay as long as you have to stay. It came with a lesson to me of you always are, if you're responsible for yourself and other people and have responsibilities, that you'll figure out a way to make it work and to pay your bills and to stay on top. So I have a lot of respect for my parents and wish that I could get everybody in the same room at this age and have that conversation with all of them so that I could better understand how they felt at the time. I would love to know, how those conversations went, and all the little nuances of the struggles that they went through. I'm certain that there's lots of stories that they could tell.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tanya, for sharing that with us. And now we have Jack Langley joining us, so we'll get his perspective on tough times and recession. All right. Well, thanks, Jack, for joining us. We appreciate you being here. We've been talking a little bit about obstacles, and for us, that normally means a recession. So you were around in 2008, yes, when the market crashed. Some people say that we're in a recession now. What's the difference? Is it the same? Is it different? Tell us.
So in my world, mortgage lending, it is different. In 2006, 2007, they kind of started seeing a little writing on the wall with, there were all kinds of crazy loan programs. I mean, we had no doc loans. We had no income, no asset verification loans. There were all kinds of crazy loans. And luckily, the company that I was with, we weren't big into that. We didn't do a lot of those. But there were loans out there that people could get where they could have an 800 credit score, buy an investment property with 100% financing, no money down. So it was just driven off of your score. You didn't have to prove your income. You didn't have to prove the asset. You didn't have to prove any of those things.
Gosh.
And it was just, so I think that's the major difference between what's going on right now and what happened then. The other thing, is that I think our inventory was a little different then.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had
Definitely.
a lot more inventory back
Agreed.
then than we have now. And so with a lot more inventory and then a lot more loan programs that allowed just about anybody to buy a home, and
Right.
literally you could have a horrible credit score, but if you could show 12 or 24 months bank statements, we would take the numbers of the deposits on your bank statement divided by 24 months, and that was your average monthly income that we could give you. It was just a crazy program. So I think the biggest difference is they've really locked down how people borrow money now, what you have to qualify, what's necessary to qualify. And so I don't anticipate what happened the last time happening this time. Now,
Right.
that's not to say that, whenever you have really, really, really good years and people are making really good money because employers were paying, like just traveling nurses, for example, in our industry. These people went from making $60,000 a year to making $260,000 a year, and now they're able to buy a home. Well, that's kind of even pulled back, and I'm fearful that some people are going to lose their homes because they're not going to be able to afford the payments even at the lower rates because they're not making the same amount of income.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
The other part to that is that I'm noticing more and more people carrying a lot more credit card debt. So a lot of people are charging, not able to pay the full balance. So I'm starting to see that kind of go on. And with that, and the fact that, interest rates are as high as they are, it's just a harder time right now for people. And I think we're just kind of starting it, to be honest with you. I think people have been using their savings and living off of what they had for a while. And I think if this continues on with gas prices, which gas prices have come down a little bit, but food prices, gas prices, everything.
Everything's inflated.
Everything is so much higher.
Yeah. Right.
Homeowners insurance has gone up. Taxes have gone up.
Right.
Almost, I don't know how many people in Green Christian County got new tax bills this year, but
All
a
of
lot.
us.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot. My personal home, my primary residence increased by more than 25%. And it was already high.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
We kind of anticipated that because obviously values are higher. That's one other piece of this puzzle is that people do have more equity in their homes now because of the price increases that we've seen. And basic supply and demand, we have higher prices. Our homes are bringing more basically because there's nothing else out there.
Yeah.
So the
Well,
inventory.
And we have
position.
a lot of people moving here from
We do.
out of state. I think that when they look at our area and most of the Midwest, they see that the homes are still more affordable than what you would see out west or east.
Absolutely.
Taxes are still more affordable than what they see, and I'm noticing that a lot of my client base are coming from places like Wisconsin, Washington, Seattle, Oregon, Arizona, California. It amazes me how many people are moving this way. And that hurts. People that sell those homes typically have good cash down payments. They're willing because they see, well, God, I couldn't buy a home like that in California. So they look at a $400,000 house here and think, man, that would be an $800,000 or $900,000 house in California. I'm willing to pay more money. So they're paying over asking.
Exactly.
And it's not as much as it used to be.
Right.
But I think that's what kind of hurt our inventory is that,
For sure.
as fast as you could build them or whatever came on the market, people are getting more than asking.
Right. And what last year in 2021-22's market, that's what elevated our pricing so high. And, a lot of people were like, oh, that's not worth that. But if the guy from California thinks it's worth that because he would never get that spending $40,000 more, offering $40,000 more in California, it's well worth it to him. So it skewed our pricing on a lot of subdivisions. And so now I feel like we're having to recover from those people coming in and being willing to pay that much over because it was worth that last year, somebody was willing to pay it. Let me say it that way. Doesn't mean that the neighbor to that house house this year can get the same price,
Yeah.
right? Appraisers all have to agree with that as well. So,
Well, we had kind of this perfect storm of lower rates.
yep.
But then you couple into that higher cost to build because, 1,000 board feet for a builder was costing $1,800.
Right.
Okay, which is the highest it's been forever. And so when you take in that cost to build, they're looking at every house I build, somebody's going to snatch up. They're paying over asking. I've got my higher cost to build. So naturally, those prices just went up. And
course.
now
Right.
cost to build has dropped back down. I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's somewhere in the $700 per 1,000 board feet for, framing lumber and basically dimension lumber. But there's a lot of stuff that has gone on. And, now with rates doing what they've done, it really has slowed the
It
business
has.
down.
Right.
Yeah. 23 has been different for all of us compared to 21 and 22 especially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to surviving the 2006, 7, 8 recession and now the semi-recession or whatever you want to call it that we're kind of in, what if anything, are there any business practices that now that business has slowed down now that you learned back then to help you survive and stabilize your business as a lender?
Yeah. So when that happened, I was with a company out of California at the time. I've only been with 3 mortgage companies ever. And I was with a company out of California. We had a lot of branches. We were hedging loans, about $500 million, $500 million a month in volume. And they were one of the first to go out. We got caught hedging, and it's not a good thing. When that happened, I became a broker, and I had a local friend here that for a few months let me use his broker's license until we got our broker's license. And then Gershman Mortgage came calling, and best decision I've ever made in my entire life. When it comes to mortgage lending, you have to prepare for the ups and downs. The problem that people don't realize is they think when we lend the money, we're done with it. And we're not. After the loan closes, we're doing almost as much work as before the loan closes because we have to go through compliance. We have to go through audits. We have to make sure that, we did everything the way we were supposed to do it. And so we're still on the hook as a lender. Even though that loan may be transferred off to another servicer, we're still on the hook because we are the lender. We're loaning our own money. We're underwriting the loan. We're guaranteeing that what we did is right. All of this company's doing, all the servicer is doing is collecting those payments. And if something goes bad, they come back after us. And they say, hey, guys, you underwrote the loan. It was your money. We're going to make you kind of pay for it. And so the nice thing about for my business and where I feel good about us is one, Gershman Mortgage is not only debt-free, completely debt-free. We fund all our own loans. We don't use warehouse lines. We don't use anybody else's money. We self-fund all of our closings, which is unique. There's not
Very
unique. The other thing is Gershman Mortgage is a small enough company that when things like this happen, we're able to scale to where we don't have to shut down a bunch of branches.
Right.
We don't have to lay off a lot of people. We're in a unique position because everybody wants to grow big. Everybody wants to be this huge company. But the reality is the customer suffers from that. So the more we grow, the more our closing times, it takes longer to close because we've got more people, more stuff. They're not wanting to, they only want to bring on really good people.
Sure.
So we don't go out and just try to headhunt anybody and their brother. We don't have a lot of leases that, like I own my building, for example. I lease it to myself, but it's just kind of a unique situation. And that's why I feel like we are probably in for another 12 to 18 months of this, maybe worse, could get a little worse. And we're positioned really good to be able to handle it. The last time this happened, unfortunately, I was with not a great company, but when I got with Gershman, we were able to grow huge because a lot of the banks, the depository banks, pulled back from mortgage lending because of the rules changes that happened. And then a lot of people like me weren't in a position to be able to close, loans on time. They had to let a lot of people go. They shut down offices here and there. I mean, I heard stories where you would start with a loan officer on Monday, and by the next Monday, that person wasn't even at that place anymore and couldn't hear from the customer. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that went on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So for our listeners out there who they're thinking interest rates are high right now. We heard a story from Tanya where the interest rates were 18% in the story that she was telling from the 80s. And obviously they're higher now. But what tips do you have or strategies do you have for someone who's thinking about buying now and they understand that the interest rate is a little higher?
Yeah. So this is just my personal belief. I'm not a financial planner, expert, any of that stuff. I hate paying interest. I'll be honest with you. I pay stuff off as fast as I can physically pay it off. I'm not somebody that enjoys doing that. But if you're thinking about buying a home, I tell people don't wait right now. Do not wait. Everybody says, well, if I wait, I'm going to get a lower rate when rates drop. The problem is because everybody's moving to the Midwest, our home prices are going up. So if you take your average $250,000 home, which unfortunately that's probably not average anymore. That's probably on the lower side of average.
Yep.
If you take that and you put 5% down, and let's say rates are at 7.5% right now, you're going to be paying about $1,661 per month in principal and interest. Okay. If you wait until rates drop, let's say it's 12 months from now, and we have an 8% increase in value. So now that home is, say, $270. Putting the same 5% down, they're financing, I think, $256 at 6.5%, 1% lower. It only drops your payment to $1,621. So about $40, $39.
Right.
If you could still buy a $250 house, yes, at 6.5%, that drops you down to, I believe, $1,501 in principal and interest only payment. But that's the problem. If you wait to buy, the home price is going to be higher. When rates drop, there's more people that enter into the market and want to buy.
Exactly.
They drive prices. And so even though you think you're going to save money, you're not. I suggest buy now if you can afford the payment. Don't buy your rate down, because so many people say, oh, I'm going to spend $5,000 and buy my rate down. Yes, it might save you $100 a month, but you have to own that house for 50 months before you realize the savings. If you spend $5,000 to save $100 a month, that's 50 months before you actually recoup that. Well, you're going to refinance in 12 to 18 months based on what the experts are saying about rates, what rates are going to do. So you're throwing that money away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're better off to do a $5,000 reduction in your principal than you are to buy the rate down.
Yeah.
So
I love that kind of forecast that you gave, and also that opinion, because so many lenders, I think, many times promote buying the rates down. We hear so much about that, and that benefits the borrower. And I think having both perspectives, then they would get to make a choice. But showing them exactly.
I run numbers. I look at amortization. I look at, even when somebody calls and says, hey, I want to refinance, the first thing I say is, how long are you going to stay in the house? Well, we're thinking about moving in a couple of years. Okay, well, let's run the numbers on that. You're going to spend maybe $3,500 to $5,500 in the cost of a refinance. Now, that may be part of it. You're resetting up your escrow account, and you're going to get a refund. And if you're smart, you'll pay into that and lower that down. But a lot of people don't.
Right.
They take that refund, they put it on a credit card, they do whatever. But they may roll $3,500 to $5,500 in to their home loan on a refinance. Well, if they're going to save $200 a month, or whatever it may be, and they're going to move out in 24 months, they're not going to recoup that to do it. And so you have to look at several factors. I also don't promote going back to a 30-year fixed, because people will be in it for 3 or 4 years, and then they'll go from a 30 back to a 30. Well, most of your interest isn't paid in the very beginning. So if you can go to a 25 or a 20, okay, you're going to save a ton of money in interest. And a lot of people don't even talk about that or look at it. I tell a lot of people, don't refinance. And they're like, what? Why not? I'm like, well, you've refinanced 2 times already in the last 2 years. How much did it cost you? Look where your balance is. I can see it on your credit report.
Right.
You went from this loan to this loan, and now you owe $15,000 more than when you bought this thing. Gosh. Where did you save?
Right. Yeah.
So you have, there's other things that you can do. And I'm not saying I don't do refinance. I do refinances. I just do them in a way that I make sure it's a benefit to the customer.
Absolutely.
So,
So since we are trying to tell our listeners how to overcome obstacles, adversity, do you have any words of wisdom in ways that you keep a positive mindset, or what do you do when you're faced with adversity? Any advice?
As far as in mortgage lending?
In anything, in life in general.
the way I look at things, too many people dwell or think, oh, this is going to happen or whatever. I try not to. I don't. Every day I get up and I'm like, all right, who am I going to be able to help today? Who am I going to kind of guide through this home ownership path or anything in life? I don't like to look and say, oh, this is going to happen, or we're going to have this crash, or we're going to have that, because ultimately I can't control that. There's nothing I'm going to do every single day that's going to help our administration handle whatever's going on in our country with this kind of mess they have going on.
Right.
And so I just wake up every day and try to be as positive as I can and just keep pushing to help, people make a good decision.
Yeah.
The other thing is to be 100% truthful with your customer. Whether they want to hear it or not, giving them the best advice will always pay, in my opinion, dividends. I have people that come back to me, even though I've referred them to a different place. Like, for instance, if somebody wanted a doctor loan. We're not great at doctor loans. It's the honest to God's truth. My agents will send them to me, and I'm like, we're going to go over here and do this doctor loan over here because it's a better product for that customer. But I can't tell you how many people will call and say, hey, I'm sending you my cousin because you actually were honest with me, and I feel like you're going to take care of them. I'm 100% going to take care of them.
I love that. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, thank you, Jack. Appreciate you again for coming in. And we hope that you, our listeners, have found some takeaways in part 1 and part 2 of our Overcoming Objections episodes. So
we want to thank you, Jack, and Gershman Mortgage for the ongoing podcast availability here with your studio. Thank you.
I feel like that's maybe why I got invited.
No.
Just kidding. Had to overcome the adversity.
Exactly.
That's right.
Thanks so much for joining us today, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Simply Authentic podcast. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Be sure to listen to us on your favorite podcasting app.